Hello, hello, my brothers and sisters. This is Garrett Bake, your brother in arms, and welcome to another episode of Awaken the Guardian. Today we have another special guest with us in studio. We have Veronica Butler. Veronica, say hi.
Hi.
And for those of you on the podcast, you can't see, she just waved. She waved at the imaginary people who are out there listening. First of all, I want to apologize. Last week, or not last week, week before last, when my podcast was released, I realized that I had a microphone issue. So you heard my guest really, really well, and me not so much. It's a good thing I talk loud. At least that's what my wife says. So anyway, Veronica and I met through an interesting place of all places. I actually found you on LinkedIn.
Right.
Which, if any of you are familiar with LinkedIn, it's a business. A business social media site. I don't know what the proper term is. It's like Facebook, but for business geeks.
Right.
And somehow we came across each other's paths. But I want her, or the reason I contacted her is I wanted her to be able to share her story, which is very unique, with you guys. And so that's what this episode is all going to be about. But before we get started on that, I want her to kind of introduce herself so you guys get to know her. So Veronica, a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I'm a mom. I've got 4 kids from 23 to 10. All my 3 oldest are girls. They're all adults, out of the house. I just have my little guy left at home.
Which one's the most like you?
My oldest daughter.
Is she?
Identical in every way.
She's got mom stubbornness.
Yep. Mom's everything. Yep.
Good. So you've got 3 are already grown up, as we say, but let's be honest, I don't even feel like I'm grown up yet.
It's true.
And then you've got 1 left at home, 10-year-old. So tell me a little bit about, just a brief snippet about like your law enforcement career.
So I grew up in law enforcement. I was born to a sergeant. It's been around me my whole life. When I finally decided I needed to start my own career, it was the natural path for me. I started back in 2002 with Gilbert Police and ended my career in 2016.
So for those of you who don't know where Gilbert is, it's not a city.
Nope, we're still the town.
It's a town, a town of 250,000 I think right now. Gilbert is a suburb of Phoenix, and it's one of the safest cities in America. At least that's what they say.
Yep.
And it really is a nice town. A nice town. So let me ask you, you grew up, your father was a sergeant. With what agency?
Out in Pinal County.
Pinal County. So south of Phoenix.
Right.
Your father was a sergeant. And anybody else in your family law enforcement?
My brother was also a police officer. I have a nephew that's a police officer, and several cousins. My ex-husband is a border patrol agent. He was military first, and then my current husband was also a police officer.
So there's a lot of police officer, a lot of blue in your family.
Yes.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So like when you were growing up, did you ever say like, I want to be a cop, or this is my path?
I think so. I was a daddy's girl all the time, so I spent all of my time with him. I remember working or going to work with him often. I would sit in his office all day and pretend that was my job. So, yeah.
That's good. Now, so you graduated high school. You became an adult, as we say, right? Was law enforcement your first, like, hey, I'm graduated, now I'm going to go into law enforcement? Or what was your path?
No, I mean, initially right out of high school, me and my ex-husband got married. He went into the military. I moved to San Diego with him, and we started our family. So I would stay at home for about 7 years. And then we had some problems in our marriage, and it was time for me to just find my own path. And so when I did, that's just where I went.
Okay, so 7 years. So you've got how many kids at this point?
We had 3.
3 children, and you decide, you know what? This whole thing that I grew up around, that I kind of feel the itch, right, to be in law enforcement. So, like, how did it actually happen, though? Because where were you living at the time?
We were in San Diego.
So you're in San Diego, and you're like, you know what? I think I want to explore this whole police thing.
Yeah, 9/11 happened. I was awake like most of the world was when it happened, and it hit home really hard for me, and it was something that I knew I needed to do something more for my community, for my kids, for everything. So shortly thereafter, there was a law enforcement convention, and I went. And initially, I actually was looking into like dispatch jobs because I just wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I was always, athletic. I was always in the gym. I was always just too physical. Like I wasn't someone that could just sit in behind a radio
Right.
or the computer screens and stuff. So I looked into dispatch stuff. And then while I was there, I was like, that's probably not for me. I need to go a little further. And I applied with Gilbert PD.
So this is the interesting thing. She kind of went around it, but I'm going to hit it. The job fairs apparently do work. Like
Yes.
I always made fun of my agency because they would send recruiters to different job fairs in different states, and I'm like, what in the hell are you doing? Like,
Right.
no idea. Well, there you go. She got recruited by Gilbert in San Diego.
Yep.
So it does work. Okay, so you end up moving back to the Phoenix metro area and start your career. Tell me what that was like. So you're mother of 3,
Right.
starting this law enforcement career. What was that like?
Well, I come from a great family, so I had a ton of support. I moved to Casa Grande, which was where my family all was. And Gilbert was only a half-hour drive for me. So I moved back home knowing that this is something I want to pursue. And within a month of being back, I got the call saying, hey, do you want this job? You can start in May. And I said, well, yeah, definitely. So I started the academy in May, which was a very hot time of the year to start the police academy.
Yeah, I started July. I feel your pain. They're like, why am I doing this again?
Right.
So, okay. So you start your career and you had your family support, which is huge,
Right.
right? Especially with your 3 children.
Right.
Do you remember how old they were at the time?
My oldest was 7. My youngest was 2.
Wow. Okay, so you got a nice span there of school age and not school age,
Right.
and there was no way you're going to do that on your own. So you start working with Gilbert, and like, how did your career start? Because I know I kind of made fun of Gilbert. Now listen, for those of you that don't know, my agency Mesa and Gilbert, they're like next to each other, and we always make fun of Gilbert. I'm pretty sure they always make fun of us. But how did your career start there in Gilbert?
After my academy, I went to patrol. I went to Graves like pretty much everybody does. I had a great supervisor. Immediately, he, sat me down and just asked like what my career goals were. And I told him that I had wanted to go into homicide eventually. My dad retired as the commander over the homicide unit. So something I wanted to do as well. And so with his support, I was able to, and my shift, I worked terrible shift. I worked all weekend nights, so I had all week.
Shocking.
So I had all week to do the trainings and stuff. So any training I put in for, he gave me the go ahead, and I learned a lot the first couple years there. And within a few years, I was selected for a position in investigations.
Okay, so you started on the street, which is where all of us peons start.
Yep.
But again, you took the initiative and said, this is the career path that I want. And so you started pursuing that.
Right.
Took the classes and whatnot. Eventually, opportunity happened, and you were able to go into investigations. Now, Gilbert, again, not a huge agency, but
Right.
large enough that they have an investigation section. And how did that start out for you? What area were you assigned to?
So at the time, Gilbert only had 2 units. We had a property crime unit and a persons crime unit. I initially was selected for property crimes, but I was there maybe 3 weeks and then transferred over into the persons crime unit.
Okay. And how long were you a detective?
I was only a detective about 2.5 years.
Okay. And then what happened after that?
I had another baby, and while I was on light duty, I was helping down in the new 3511 unit. It was just starting, and so I worked there for a while, but it was nice to have like the normal routine. I had enough seniority by then, shockingly, with only 6-7 years on the job. I had enough seniority to then go to a weekday day shift, and so that was where I went.
So this is the interesting part. Like, cops, we love to like this big mantra of, I work weekends, I work graveyards, and rah, rah, rah. And the truth is, we're piss ants. Like, we're little bitches. Like, what we really want is to work a normal schedule like everybody else. And for any of you who work shift work, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, yes, I get it. You got to start bottom of the pole, but eventually that's where we all want to end up. Like I remember when I first started making fun of all the day shifters.
Right.
I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
you guys are idiots. Like all the cool stuff happens at
Yep.
night, which is partly true. And then eventually I got to day shift and realized, hey, look, I can sleep again.
Right.
I have a normal life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
So anyway, so you go back to patrol for family, and life is working.
Right.
Everything's going along the way that you would expect it to.
Right.
So tell me what happened, and this was 2015.
50? Mm-hmm.
So what happened in 2015?
So we had an officer-involved shooting. Officer was okay. Bad guy went down. I was one of the first responders that arrived there, you know, like all the other officers. Once we knew our guy was good, we tended to the bad guy. He didn't live, but it was, I mean, in our books at the time, it was a win. Our guy went home safe. Everything was okay. It was a long day. It was in August, so it was hot. We spent all day out there canvassing. One of the things that I was fortunate, not fortunate, I guess, depending on how you look at it, was because I had the detective experience. I was used a lot in patrol to do some detective work. So whether it was child interviews, just a lot of different things. So that day I was assigned to go and do a neighborhood canvass and try to find anybody who might have heard or seen something that happened that day.
So without getting into the details, like what were the specifics about the shooting?
He tried to run our officer over. We found out after he had warrants for his arrest. Simple. It wouldn't have done anything, you know, nothing.
He would have just gone to jail.
Right. And he decided he was going to run over our officer, and our officer was diligent enough to see it coming and take care of it.
Right. So this happens. It ends up being a long day for you. Now, obviously, you weren't the shooter, but you were there immediately after. And for those of you who experienced this, like I've gone through this a few times, it's a pretty interesting situation. Like it's stressful. Your adrenaline's through the roof. You're trying to make sure your guy's okay. You're trying to figure out, you know, is anybody else hit? Is everything okay? And then now after that happens, that initial rush of adrenaline, comes the long, arduous process of the investigation. And unfortunately, most agencies don't treat you the way that you should be treated after something like this.
Right.
So they basically expect you to just do your job. And
Yeah.
because you had extra experience, guess what? Cool, you were here. Cool, you tried to tend to the bad guy and he died. But why don't you go ahead and canvass the area?
Right.
And you're like, well, all right. And this is a pattern that continually repeats itself, you know, in law enforcement. It repeats itself in the military, you know, and even in positions like in corporate America. Like, we've started to beat this idea of having feelings or having independent thoughts out of people.
Yep.
Like, literally, this is your job. Go get the damn job done.
Yes.
That's all we want you to do. And so it's middle of July, right?
August. Yep.
Which for those of you who've never been to Phoenix in July or August, it's 120 degrees and it's monsoon season, so humidity's up above 50%. And yes, it's hot, to say the least. So you go through the incident, then you go through the long ass day that follows.
Right.
Now, what were some of the thoughts that were going through your head?
Really just getting the job done, like finishing up my canvas, talking to whoever I needed to, getting the information I needed, and just going home, having lunch. Like, this happened earlier in the morning. My shift started at 5. This probably happened around 9. You know, we hadn't eaten, little to drink. Like, it was just go, 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 go after that. In the middle of a road, like, you have the heat from the asphalt, like, just everything, you know, that I guess at the time you don't really think of because you're so used to just doing your job.
Right.
We had a new policy in effect that any critical incident that officers responded to, now were being sent, officers were then going to be sent to a contracted psychologist who would go to the police department and meet with us there prior to going back to work.
So I'm going to pause that real quick because you brought something up that was real interesting. Like, you just talk about your shift, then you talk about lunch, and you talk about it's like you're filling off a checklist. Check, I took care of this. Check, I took care of this. Check, check, check. Because at the end, what did you just want?
Go home.
That's it. You just want to go home.
Yeah.
Like, and think about this for any of you who, and here's the coolest part about this. Like, some of you are listening to this right now and you're like, well, I've never shot anybody, or I've never been around anybody who's been shot. So how did this apply to me? Well, take away the shooting part and insert the word critical incident. If you've been around any type of critical incident at work, and of course there's varying degrees of that, people don't care about anything other than, did you finish the checklist?
Right.
What is the checklist? What is the checklist? What is the checklist? Because at the end, you want one thing, and that's to go home, and they want one thing, which is just to finish the paperwork.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, Gilbert had contracted with a clinical psychologist,
Correct.
and you said that they were brought into the department.
Yes.
And some agencies and some departments have it where you go out to visit the psychologist, and sometimes they have it to where the psychologist comes in. So how soon after the incident did this happen?
I believe our group we were the first group to do this, and we'd had other things implemented at the time as well. I mean, we'd done the go out to meet this person at their office in the past. That was one of the things they had us try. And then we also had the roundtable critical incident stress management group that nobody really liked, but it was part of.
Explain why nobody liked that.
Because you go through a really crappy experience and you just want to go home. You have the paper, you have all those checklist things you have to do. They hold it like many hours later when they can get everybody that they want involved in it. A lot of civilians, people who aren't out on the street with you, don't know what actually happened. I know they're trying to be helpful, but it's sometimes just not. And you sit around in a circle and everybody gets your turn to talk and share if you have anything to share. And most officers just pass the bucket on to the next person and nothing's accomplished, but we had to wait many hours just to have to participate in that event.
Right. Because this is what happens, and we've talked about this before, is you go through the academy, they beat the feelings and emotions out of you. You go through your field training program, they beat the feelings and emotions out of you.
Right.
You literally start going through your entire career. And how long had you been on at this point? 12 years? 13?
Yes, 12, 13 years.
So 12, 13 years in, and like at this point, you have no more feelings and emotions.
Right.
Like they're there, but they're so far buried inside that there's no getting them out.
Right.
And so now you have this critical incident,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, it can screw with your mind. It can definitely screw with your mind. You have this critical incident, and you sit down with a bunch of random strangers, some of them you know, but a bunch of random strangers in a big kumbaya circle.
Right.
And now you're expected to go down into the deep, dark cavern where your feelings are locked away and unlock them and open them up
Right.
and share them.
Yes.
How often does that happen?
Very rare.
Very rare, right?
Yeah.
It's not a comfortable situation. Like we'll talk about this more here in a little bit, but like if you're the guy or the girl who's sharing these deep, dark emotions, all of a sudden what happens?
Well, there's something wrong with you.
There is something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Like, what is your major malfunction?
Yep.
Okay, so you go through this. Nobody really says anything. You get the green light.
During this one, no, that was beforehand. For this incident, we were seeing this contracted psychologist who showed up at our PD. So that we all went the following day. Everybody that I was on scene with was there waiting their turn in this hallway to go in and see her. So, yeah.
And so explain that. What was that experience like?
Small office. It was in our counseling department, just a vacant office that she was using. Walk in, introduce ourselves. She gets a snippet of our background. Part of, I think, is probably pretty common is she asked if I had ever seen a psychologist for any other work-related incidents. I mentioned one time that I had a few years back, just in brief though, and then we went back to the reason I was there.
Okay. And so you're going through this, and what's happening?
She's just, I don't even know if she was taking notes. She's just listening, asking a couple questions, listening. I'm there to say what I have to say so that I can go back to work the next day. Yep. Check box. Yep.
Check the box.
Yep.
Check the box.
Yep.
All right. So you finished up with that, and then what happens?
Once we finished talking about the incident that I was there for, she wanted to go back to the incident from a few years back, my experience with the other psychologist.
So this was not your first critical incident?
No.
Okay, so you had one how many years prior?
3 years prior.
3 years prior, you had been involved in a previous critical incident.
Correct.
So talk a little bit about that.
So that was May of 2012. I was in patrol, and we had gotten a call towards the end of my shift it came out as just a domestic violence call. On my way down, I was kind of looking at my computer to see what was happening. I knew I was one of the closest there to that scene. But you can see as the dispatcher's updating things, shots fired, those kind of comments were coming out on the MDC, but not necessarily over communications. Like, it wasn't being relayed by dispatch at the time that it was more than just the normal domestic violence call.
Right. So any of you who've ever had this come across your computer, either just through the computer or through a dispatcher, like the blood starts pumping, adrenaline starts going, like this is it.
Yep.
You don't know what you're going to get into.
Right.
And in fact, there was an incident earlier this week where there were 7 police officers that were shot responding to an incident. 7. Mm-hmm. Like, you never know what it is that you're getting into. So now you're trying to balance 2 things. You're trying to balance this, hey, I'm here to get a job done. Let's go get the job done with shit. Like, whew, shots fired. Like, this is it. I'm going into it.
Yep.
This is what I signed up for. I get it, but this is it. I'm going for it.
Yeah. I was probably the second or third to arrive. Turns out, we got there. When we arrived, first thing we could see were 2 dead bodies right on the front porch. We didn't know if either of them were the shooters. We didn't really have a whole lot of information. We knew that there was somebody inside on the phone still that was still alive, so we knew we had to get in and get her. Waited for a few more officers to get there before they went in and cleared the house. There was a total of 5 dead bodies that day. The shooter was one of them, and it was his girlfriend, her daughter, her daughter's fiance, and the 15-month-old granddaughter.
So a total of 5 victims, suspect victims, in this house, deceased.
Yep.
Like, I've never been to a scene with 5 deceased people. Yeah, 1, yeah, maybe 2, but like never 5. Mm-hmm. And you roll up and immediately you see the bodies. Like, it's not we've all responded to the shots fired call. It's fireworks, or it's a loud slamming door, or whatever, backfire. and now, no, like, this is legit.
Right.
And so you're going through, adrenaline's pumping, you're trying to maintain your composure, and you come across this scene of these 5 individuals. Mm-hmm. Like, at this point, are you still in like go mode, work mode, or have you started to see a little contrast with some feelings coming up?
No, for me it was all go work mode. Like I said, there was the girl that was inside that had been hiding in a closet. So officers went in, got her out. Literally had to carry her over the bodies of her family member. And for like a second after they got her out, the officers that were standing there all just kind of had this dumbfounded look, and then it was like, shit, we have victims. Let's see if any of these people are alive. Let's try to help them out. So me and one of my partners went and tried to work on the baby. She was, hot, clammy. Clearly, we were trying to find a pulse. We thought we had a pulse on her, so it was like, all right, we have to, take care of this. As I was down there with the baby, I remembered looking up and just seeing probably 6, 7 of my fellow officers just standing over me, and just the fear in a way I'd never seen. Because Gilbert's a small department. I was one of a handful of female officers. We didn't have many. I always worked with nothing but guys. They were always, big badasses that just took care of everything. So I'm down on the ground with this baby, and I look up because I can hear it in some of the voices. I can hear the shakiness, things that they used to call, everyone calls me V. So I just remembered hearing like, hey V, do you got it? Is she okay? But I could hear in their voice just like the shakiness, like their fear, I guess. And I looked up and realized that I had like just a crowd of people watching. It was, trying to get fire in it seemed like forever. Like Gilbert has a great relationship with our fire department. But I remember being so like just disgruntled after that because it seemed like it took them forever. And then they got there and it was like, I mean, they obviously knew more about her condition than I did, but it just seemed like there was no hurry up to save this baby. And so we were really frustrated, me and the officers that were there.
So fire department shows up. Do they take the child?
Mm-hmm.
So they end up transporting her.
Right.
And she ends up passing away.
Yep.
So she passes away, and now here you are at the scene with, I'm guessing at this point, there's probably at least 20 officers.
At least. I mean, by this point, we probably had the majority of our investigations unit, command staff. There was probably everybody that was working that day showed up.
So there's 20 to 30 officers, and for those of you who have ever been involved in an incident like this, it is sometimes utter chaos.
Yes.
There are so many people trying to get so many things done, like it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that when we talk about critical incident, you brought up the second one first and not the first one. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But at this point, like, you would literally held a 15-month-old baby who had been shot in your arms, trying to resuscitate this child, waiting for what seemed like forever for the fire department to get there. And then finally they take her, and now it's like, okay, well, now there's 30 people here. Everybody from the chief on down is trying to tell me what to do.
Right. After that, I ended up being assigned to go with our detective who was going to interview the surviving daughter. So I had to go from there to back to our station and watch the interview of her, basically.
And what was that like?
I mean, it definitely made the situation real. I knew I wasn't leaving anyways because that was the time we had the critical incident stress management little Yahoo parties after. So I knew I was going to have to be there for that. I knew I had to write reports, but it was just listening to her tell us what had happened, what she heard happen. I mean, a majority of it was just her crying. I mean, she just lost her mom, her sister, her niece. Her parents obviously weren't together, so I don't even think her dad was in the area to come right away to help her.
So this whole time, right, you've got 3 children.
Right.
Or
I had 4
at
at the time, yep.
Apologize. 4 at this time. 4 children. You just held a 15-month-old, tried to save this child's life, and now you're listening to this woman, the only surviving victim, talk about this traumatic incident, crying and everything. Like, are you still in cop mode?
I would say yes. I think I was still one of those that, like, I was able to just stay focused on the task and not, I mean, anybody who probably knew me years ago would say I was probably one of the most emotionless females out there. Like, I just took care of business and I didn't have a whole list of feelings that I ever went through.
Right. So think about this. And we just condensed this huge traumatic incident into like 2 sentences. 5 people shot and killed, 1 surviving victim, trying to save the baby, listening to the victim cry and sob about the fact that she'd lost almost everybody in her entire family.
Right.
And she just said that she was one of the most cold, emotionless females and probably members of the department at that time.
Right.
And it's interesting because think about this, right? She's a mother to 4 children. 4 children. And this entire incident happens, and she's still like stone cold V.
Yep. Yeah.
So the day, I'm sure, progresses. It goes on. It goes along. Eventually, you have your little kumbaya party, and you get home.
Well, during my first probably taste of emotion that night was during this kumbaya. Everybody that was before me skipped their turn. I think, in fact, when they did say anything, it was just that they were really angry at the situation. Just, we all felt anger for what had happened. The guy next to me, one of my partners, was the first to actually speak about emotion, show emotion that day, that evening. And one of the things he said that is kind of what brought it home for me was that his only solace in the situation was that knowing that the baby had died in the arms of a mom. So that
mom was you.
Yeah, that was me. So that's what made it, real for me.
Here, have some extra weight, and let's see how you deal with this one.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you start to like crack a little bit.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
What do you immediately do when you start to feel that?
I think of my kids. I mean, I had 3 baby girls. I know what they look like, how they were in comparison to this little girl. Um, I had a 4-year-old at home at this point. Uh, I still just wanted to get home, but I did, I definitely had those. I don't even know how to describe them. They were just feelings. Like they weren't familiar to me. I didn't like them. And I just wanted it to go away, basically.
I wanted the feelings to go away.
Yeah.
Why? Because you wanted to get home.
Yes.
And you knew the only way to get home was to what?
Hurry up and get this over with. Yep.
Stone Cold B.
Yep.
All right, so you finish up that and you get to go home.
I did. Yep.
Is there any follow-up from that?
Well, when I got home, it was weird. I like I said, I'd never had any feelings or emotions about the job. I just did what we had to do. But I remember getting home and like touching my son and then realizing like, ooh, yeah, I don't want to touch him right now. Like his squishy, soft, fatty arms were very reminiscent of the little baby I had held that night. So I remember just sitting there like, okay, this is abnormal. But it'll pass. It'll eventually just go away and I'll be good.
Right. So you're starting to feel these like feelings and emotions because like, let's be honest. There's no academy training for, hey, you're going to go to a shooting scene with 5 victims. Oh, and you're going to try and save the 15-year-old girl.
Yep.
Like, there's no training for that. And in fact, I think we went to the academy around the same time. Like, there's never any training about, like, okay, when the mind is going one way, like, how is it that you course correct? How is it that you bring things back together?
Right.
And, like, there isn't. And I keep preaching this to you guys. It doesn't mean that you're broken when you don't know how to process things.
Right.
Because there's no way for you to learn how to process everything. There's no way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mom. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO dad. It doesn't matter if you're a cop, a male or a female. Like, it doesn't matter. Each of us is going to come across instances and situations in life where our mind doesn't know how to process
Right.
it. And so instead of thinking that you're broken, start to search for alternative answers because they're out there.
Yeah.
Like I preach this to people all the time. The reason that these kumbaya circles don't work is because the first person to talk feels like I'm going to get the finger pointed.
Yeah.
I'm going to get backstabbed. Everybody's going to think that I'm the broken one. I'm the screwed up one and nobody's going to want to work with me. No one's going to want to talk to me, on and on and on and on. And the sad thing is that they're true. They're accurate. And we'll talk more about you here in a second. But listen, if any of you are struggling with any critical incident, and we use this broad term critical incident, anything fucked up that happened in your life that you don't know how to deal with, it doesn't mean that you're broken.
Right.
It just means that you haven't learned how to deal with it yet. Like, that's it. So quit thinking that you're broken, but better yet, quit acting like you're broken. You're not. You just don't know how to deal with it yet.
Yeah.
So at this point, back to you. Back to you. That's this point where you're feeling some feelings and emotions, but you immediately do what with them?
Put them away.
You put them away. You stuff them back inside. You're like, I got a job to do.
Yeah.
One of those jobs is mom,
Right.
and the other job is police officer. I got to get these jobs. Like, nobody can see this.
Yeah.
I don't have time for this.
Right.
So, did you take any days off?
Nope. Went back to work the next day.
The next day, five gunshot victims, little baby, interview with crying and screaming and yelling, and I'm going to go back to work the next day.
Yep.
So you immediately suppress it. And I'm guessing at this point you stick something in the back of your mind and you're like, it's out. I'm forgetting about it.
Right. Yep.
So how much time elapses between that and this second critical incident?
About just over 3 years.
So you got 3 years in between, and did anything come up in between?
No.
Never came up.
Nope.
So you go back to work. Everything's, we'll call it back to normal.
Right.
But the skewed sense of the word normal.
Right.
You go back. 3 years happens. Second incident happened. You go to see a psychologist for that specific incident where the officer shot and killed the guy who tried to run him over. There's nothing there.
Right.
You're good.
Yep.
You're good. So you're done, or you think you're done.
Right.
And then what happens?
So she started asking about that incident again from 2012. Wanted to know all about it. I mean, I was brief because it wasn't something that I I'd put it away. It was over and done with. It was something that I knew if I sat there and talked about that, yeah, I would have feelings I didn't like, but it wasn't the kind of feelings that were going to stick around. There was no need to get into it anymore.
Right.
But she asked, and then she, at the end, asked me to come back to see her that Friday, so it was a few days later.
So you go back to see her, and what happens?
Right away when I get there, she tells me she just wants to focus on the incident from 2012. She thinks that I might benefit from it if I go back and deal with it, that it won't just surprise me at some point and come back and get me later. So
what are you thinking when she said that?
that she's crazy.
Crazy bitch.
Yeah, this isn't going to come back to get me. So right away she hands me an iPad. And on the iPad, it was a black screen with the blue ball right at the center of it. And she tells me, once this ball starts moving, it's going to go back and forth across the screen. Just follow it, eyes only, and just want you to think about that incident, just from beginning to end. Just think about that incident. So I did. I sat there, and there was no conversation or dialogue between us. I just sat there and I thought about 2012 and how ridiculous it seemed that I was sitting there looking at a blue ball that just went across this black screen. Like to me at the time, it was pointless.
Okay. I know you said pointless to me, but like, what's the real word you were thinking?
It was crap. It was, it just.
It was crap.
Yeah.
Of course, you'd be the PG virgin. I get it. All right. So you thought this was worthless.
Right.
Okay. So what happens? Nothing?
Nothing
happens. And then what?
She tells me she wants me to come back the following week to just continue to work on that. So, I've always been like a rule follower. So I did what she asked. I went back there. I didn't see any harm to it at the time. So I went back. And each appointment after that was exactly the same. Just handed me the iPad, asked me to look at it and think about that incident.
How many times did you go back?
It was a total of 5 visits. The last couple were really ineffective because my third visit with her is when just things went south. And
what do you mean things went south?
During my third visit, about halfway through, looking at this iPad and thinking about this incident, all of a sudden I just remembered I started feeling like sweaty, and my heart started racing, and my legs started shaking, and it just, something was clearly not going right. And in the past, when I thought about that incident, I would see like just still images of what had happened that day. I never saw it like in the live feed or anything. It just was pictures of things that had happened.
Never like a movie roll.
Right. And that day is about somewhere in the minute 30, 35 or something. All of a sudden, my still pictures turned into a movie roll. I mean, sound and everything. I could hear the guides again. I could hear the girls screaming, just the panic in everyone's voice. My partner who was trying to help me with her, like I could hear his voice, and just everything that day, that everyone moving around us, it was there again.
Okay. Now, you guys are not going to like this, but unfortunately, this is what we're going to do. So this is actually going to be the pause in this episode. And here's why. What we're going to get into is going to take a long time, and I want you guys to be able to have the time to actually listen to it. So we're going to pause this for now, but next week we will continue this conversation as we delve into this whole idea of critical incidents and how it is that the body and the mind deal with them. Now, listen, before we finish up today, I want you guys to remember something. Well, like I talked about earlier, just because something happens to you and you don't know how to deal with it doesn't mean that you're broken. Like, this life is all about learning how to deal with things that we've never experienced before. Like being a mom, being a dad, like there's no manual on that. You just kind of wing it.
You're right.
Some days are good, some days are bad, but in the end, things always work out. So listen, if you've been involved in something like this and you're having issues, then it's okay. That's the first thing you need to realize. Second of all, reach out to somebody. Like, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not any of those things, right? But I have been through my share of shit, we'll call it. Mm-hmm. And if you're curious how it is that I made it through my stuff and what it is that I do now to make sure that I can process all of this stuff, because there's always something new that comes up, then reach out and we'll chat. Here pretty soon on the site, we're going to have something. It's called a 7-day challenge. And this 7-day challenge is literally whatever it is in your life that's not working or that you're not processing right or whatever it is, it helps you get super clear on how to get through it. So we'll have that up pretty soon. But listen, for now, if you've got an issue, hey, you don't have to reach out to me. You don't have to reach out to a psychologist. You don't have to reach out. Like, find somebody. It could be a coworker. It could be a boss. It could be a family member, a neighbor, a friend, a church member, a pastor, a priest. Like, it doesn't matter, but you need to find somebody to talk to about it. 1, you're not alone, and 2, you're not broken. All right, that is it for today's episode. As always, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one.